Ladies and gentlemen, this is another episode of the ATACS podcast, Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. It is July 20th, 2020, a lot of 20s in that date. I am hosting today. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina, and joining us on this panel where we are going to talk about, I should say up front what we're talking about, this is Animal Crossing New Horizons. We're going to have a deep dive into Animal Crossing, the latest iteration on Nintendo Switch. And I don't think the term spoiler cast can apply to an Animal Crossing game. There's not really any story to spoiler, but just as the heads up front that this is a no holds barred discussion, so to speak. So we will talk about whatever we want to talk about Animal Crossing. We're going to dive deep into the game, kind of pick it apart. What do we like? What do we not like? What do we think of it overall? And we'll see where that wild journey takes us. I'm joined by a panel of Animal Crossing experts here. We have Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How's it going, Nate?
Number one expert. Just gonna go ahead and stake my claim there.
All right. Well, I'm happy to be joined by the number one expert on this podcast here today. It's a very special occasion.
Yep.
Also,
you're welcome.
Thanks for blessing us with your presence. Also joining us is Ryan from New York. How's it going, Ryan?
That's great.
Can you compete?
It's been a while.
Yes, it has. Can you compete with the number one expert?
Number one expert at Animal Crossing?
I think he just said the number one expert.
I mean, yeah, generally speaking, that plays.
Well, I certainly can't compete in Animal Crossing, so I'm not gonna put a flag anywhere near that. I am an Animal Crossing noob.
Well, that'll segue nicely in our first question. But before that, rounding out our panel of experts is Alex from Cary, North Carolina. What are you an expert in, Alex?
Hey, I am an expert in Animal Crossing Amiibo. I've got the entire collection and the cards as well. All, I don't know how many there are, probably like 600, 800 of them.
Dang it.
Yikes.
Usurped already.
I don't think you can say you're the expert anymore.
I mean, it's probably actually sitting there
just
on
the
the
Amiibos.
camera. I see a large collection directly behind him.
Yeah, that's a lot
I
of
feel
stuff
like
back
that's
there.
hard to contest.
All I have is this black void of my laundry room that at some point a monster will appear and walk up behind me.
We'll save that for the for a different podcast.
Yeah.
So Ryan mentioned something that I think would be a good topic to start off here. Ryan called himself an Animal Crossing noob, and I would be curious up front to get a sense of what Animal Crossing experience everyone had going into New Horizons. Is it Horizon or Horizons? Is it singular or plural?
I think it's plural.
New Horizons.
And so I guess quickly for me, I played the original GameCube Animal Crossing and then also New Leaf on the 3DS. So I skipped a couple between those.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm the same as you.
Yeah, and I was about to say Nate's probably the same because we have shared history on that front. Ryan, did I hear you correctly that this was your first Animal Crossing?
Yeah.
And what about you, Alex? What's your Animal Crossing history?
I had started out on the GameCube version, so way back when. Really dug that game. And then I kind of fell off on the subsequent iterations back, came back on board with the 3DS version, New Leaf. Also played the mobile version, Pocket Camp, for way longer than I should have. I guess that kind of just tided me over until New Horizons showed up. So I don't think I'm an expert on the games as a result, but I am a big fan of the series.
Cool.
Um, so it sounds like a lot of us had a similar boat of, other than Ryan, started on the cube, had a break, and New Leaf kind of brought us all back. And New Leaf, other than Pocket Camp, was the most recent one before New Horizons, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but New Horizons
Yeah.
brings a handful of new things, and maybe that's a good. And unless anyone else has a strong desire to start somewhere else, maybe that can be a place to start of like what were kind of New Horizons like new like what were the things it build is like, oh, this is the new direction for the series, like what are its new features, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and specifically, I think there are some things about New Horizons that they changed or added that worked really well for me.
So what do you
Whereas I had played the GameCube one and New Leaf, but I would never say that I really got super into them. Like I thought they were neat, um, but I think New Horizons is probably the one I've gotten the most into. And I think for me that has to do with how they kind of structured the core progression of the game, at least up to getting like the Island Designer app and the um, getting the first KK Slider concert. It felt very much more objective focused. It gives you all the Nook Miles challenges, gives you sort of rolling out things step by step. I think the crafting loop plays really well into that. Um, and all of those things are kind of, I think pretty much all of those things are new or significantly different from how the previous Animal Crossings were, where you just kind of dropped on an island and you could pretty much do most things from the start, once you got a couple tools, which did not break.
yeah
And there were not upgraded versions of either. So
yeah
I think that loop, the introduction, progression, and the crafting loop really worked to draw me in little by little so that I got way more into this game than I have the previous ones.
I'm kind of curious, like, so I don't know if it's quite this big of a departure, but I had not played a Monster Hunter game, for example, until Monster Hunter World.
Hmm.
And what I heard about that game is that it, it obviously it was a really high quality console release, but it also streamlined some of the gameplay systems. Was there any of that in New Horizons, or do you feel like maybe they made things a little more accessible, or in sort of a similar way, or was it still pretty much just a classic Animal Crossing experience?
I might say like almost yes and no, because like
Yeah.
I think some things were maybe streamlined a little bit, but they also like, I mean, the crafting is a whole big new system they added that is like kind of complicates it in a way. Like the fact
Hmm.
that your tools now break all the time and you have to constantly gather resources to, make a new shovel, whereas in previous games your shovel never broke. Like that feels like an unstreamlining in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it artificially lengthens the game
Hmm.
time because you're constantly going back and recrafting necessary tools. Um, Especially since you can't just craft it right on the spot, you have to run all the way back to your house
Yeah.
or a nearby workbench.
unless you carry a workbench in your pocket, and then you can throw it down on the ground and craft it on the spot.
Yeah.
That is genius. Why didn't I think of that?
That's a good idea. I like that.
But yeah, to your point, Alex, to me, one of the big differences I felt from previous Animal Crossings is that, like, I don't know, artificial maybe a little harsh, but I also think there's truth in that of like stretching out that progression. So, like, as Nate was talking about having that progression, part of me appreciated that, but part of me also felt like it took longer to get to where I was trying to go in New Horizons than it took in the previous games. And I'm not placing value on that. I don't know if that's better or worse, but it made for a different feel.
Yeah.
Um,
I think for me, specifically with this game and this style of game, it's actually better. I think this is one of the few games in history that I can point to and say, I'm glad they made it slower and take longer to do things.
Right.
Because it actually, I think because Animal Crossing's main thing that it does super well is a charming world that you just want to that the more time you spend in it, the more connection you sort of build with the game,
Right.
and that's sort of the main draw of it, right? So I think having those extra systems that in a way force you to spend more time with the game to do even basic stuff that you kind of just want to do, it sort of works in a way that I would never thought I would say that I'm really glad they stretched this game out and made it take longer, because
Right.
that's like the opposite of how I feel about every game ever.
Yeah.
I think visually it also
Hmm.
was more apparent in how you were progressing. You start off on this sparse island with weeds
Yeah.
everywhere, some cliffs you can't even climb up. And then, as a week rolls by, as 2 weeks rolls by, and you put the time and effort into it, you see that deserted island really build up
Yeah.
into what some people have, um, some amazing designs on their
Hmm.
islands. Like, just you can't compete with that.
Yeah.
It looks like it's like the streets of Tokyo or something.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. I think that game has a really, really strong sense of progression in that way, where you can really see the difference between a starting out island and an island that somebody has put 200 hours into.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that, and the game does look really nice, and also being able to place items on the island, because Nate and Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in at least the previous games I played, you could only decorate your house.
Hmm.
So the island itself wouldn't, you could play the game for months, and the island itself didn't look all that different. Whereas now, by being able to place things on the island and terraform and all that, you can really, like, the difference between that day one on the island and 3 months later is pretty profound.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
get this. They started playing with some of that stuff in New Leaf because you were the mayor in that game and you could make some decisions about the town, but I don't think it was anything as drastic as terraforming the land by any stretch. And I don't think you could just like put a couch somewhere wherever you felt like if you wanted to.
Yeah, there was a quote from one of the Nintendo Treehouse um, uh, translators that basically said that in New Leaf, Animal Crossing made you the mayor. In New Horizons, you're basically God
Yeah.
because you can just reshape the island at your will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like people drawing or drawing like rivers and stuff so that it looks like a picture of Blathers on the mini map.
Yeah.
Like that kind
It's
of
pretty
stuff
great.
is only possible in New Horizons.
Yeah, and that stuff's fun. And like, at first when I started discovering that stuff, I'm like, oh, they're giving you too much control. Like, you can really like screw up your island in a way.
Mhm.
But then the more I played, I'm like, Animal Crossing is just like such a laid back, chill thing. Like, if people want to, make their island look like Blathers or whatever else, like, go for it. Um,
Yeah, it's a great evolution for the series, and just how much expressivity it gives to the player, how much opportunity to create and sculpt their experience to be exactly what they want. It's a really, really good evolution.
Yeah, so did everyone here get really into decorating your island? Like, was that a big draw, especially compared to previous games for Nate and Alex? But I mean, also for Ryan as your first one, like, was that a big aspect of this for you? Because I mean, Nate, you kind of talked about earlier of like this game is a lot. The series as a whole is a lot about like just spending time on this island and in this world, and it's kind of a chill, maybe lackadaisical is too strong of a word, but it's a pretty meandering kind of game.
Yeah.
And like, how did y'all, were you like, because like I'm more of a player who like, oh, I get a goal in my head and I just like furiously tackle it until it's done. So for me,
Mhm.
I like sometimes I would be like, oh, I want to get this thing done on the island, and then the game kind of like it almost has these artificial restraints of like, oh, you can only do so much in a day, and like it kind of forces you to slow down a bit. And I made my peace with that and found enjoyment in that. And I guess I'm curious for you three, like, did you kind of enjoy the meandering Animal Crossing pace, especially when like you have access to decorating your island and like all the extra options that this game has compared to previous ones?
So I guess as a newcomer to the series, it's really interesting because I did a little bit of a write up. I like to write down my thoughts about games I've played, and just kind of stepping back from Animal Crossing. Um, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself the biggest sim guy in the world. Um, I've enjoyed games before, like SimCity and um, you know Stardew Valley and maybe some more RTS things. But a lot of those games have, I think, a bit more direct gameplay loops, where like a lot of times the things you acquire sort of help you meet your goals, or there's some sort of combat element to the game. Whereas in Animal Crossing, there is sort of a loop. There's sort of progression in terms of like upgrading your house and getting more inventory and getting access to better tools, but it's pretty flat, I felt like. So there is a bit of that. I mean, you start with the barren island, and you kind of one of your goals is just to sort of build it up and bring in villagers and reach 5 stars or 3 stars or whatever. Like there are definitely some goals that the game helps you set, but it's interesting to me because when I step back from it, I'm like, this is not exactly the kind of game like I'm always into. I've definitely sunk my teeth, like I said, into some of these types of games before, but a lot of times I like for there to be like combat or like some direct gameplay loop. So it's curious to me. I mean, Animal Crossing, there are definitely some things like you mentioned, like I did enjoy like some of the island planning stuff. And like you said, there's sort of an entertainment value in just seeing like the kind of elaborate and creative things that other people did, which
Mhm.
totally blew away anything that I did. Like I just wanted to have like maybe some nice brick paths, and like my house is like in a relatively decent order and a few decorations. I didn't do a lot of terraforming. Like, I didn't do a lot of clear cutting and stuff like that. I just kind of like, it's like, well, I'll move this tree here, and like I'll build like a fountain here, and like that part was pretty casual. But another thing that I also found that I enjoyed along the way was just sort of the like you mentioned, the interactions with the different villagers and kind of like the little mini stories that sort of created, where different villagers at different times of day might ask you for something, or they might give you something, or they might need help with something, or you might just happen to catch a couple of villagers like talking to each other. And even though you see kind of the different personality types, like as you talk to more and more villagers, like it still creates these kind of like unique little mini stories, like where your villagers kind of like, um, you know, interact with you at certain times or in certain ways that, probably are pretty unique. So yeah, it's an interesting experience. But as far as the specific question about the decorating, I did do some of it. I did enjoy some of the island planning, but um, and once I unlocked paths, that was
Yeah.
one thing I think Flex you touched on too, is that occasionally there were some artificial barriers. That was one of the things I found a bit frustrating, is that whenever I was starting to build some houses, like I wanted a good way to kind of measure and plan. And it's like, I'm pretty sure this game has like the ability to lay down paths, but I just, I guess I just don't have it yet or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I had to redo a lot of houses because they were so crooked once I started laying down like straight brick paths. But yeah, that was just kind of an interesting like newcomer experience of it. Yeah, obviously that is one of the things that's fun about it is the planning and decorating. But yeah, it was sort of different from the sim games that I've been used to in some ways.
I do think that while I think most of the progression stuff is like almost perfectly timed, or at least was for me, to the point where like when I wanted something, I was like just about to get it. I think the one exception to that is like the pathing stuff. I wish they could have maybe found a way to roll that out a little sooner, even if they separated that from the terraforming stuff a little bit to make that the paths come out a little faster. But that's like my only gripe with that progression system.
Yeah, the pathing in particular felt like it came pretty late. Because, yeah, like, I think a lot of people probably had this experience, like, that Ryan kind of alluded to, of like, oh, like, they first ask you to place a couple houses, and, like, you're like, I don't know, it's this, island that's not really well defined in any way, and you plop down some houses somewhere. You're like, I don't know where to put them. Like, I haven't really thought out how to organize this entire island. And then, fast forward a couple dozen hours, and you get pathing, and you're like, ooh, this doesn't really work.
Yeah, none of this makes any sense now.
Yeah, and I think the 3-star requirement for pathing requires a certain number of villagers. Like you probably have to go up from your starting number. I feel like I kept getting a low rating, and it was because I sandbagged so long on recruiting more villagers. I kind of stuck with my 3 or 5 or whatever for a little bit too long.
Yeah, I kept getting a low rating even though I had a bunch of villagers, and it was because I had too many trees.
There were some, you could kind of tell whenever I guess you looked at the feedback, but there were some very arbitrary, like you needed a certain number of flowers, like you needed a certain number of crafted decorations, and it's like, it doesn't matter how they look or where you put them. It's, they don't have to be ordered or anything. You just have to have like a bunch of junk.
Yeah, the only thing Isabel would ever tell me that I needed to do to improve my rating was like, there are too many trees. People keep getting lost in the woods.
Well, if I remember correctly, you had a pretty dense forest somewhere.
Yeah, my island was all rural. I didn't want a big city. I planted trees everywhere.
I guess KK just can't come to a backwoods.
He came eventually. I just had to throw a bunch of junk around. That overcame the tree problem, I guess.
It's all about the ratio, right? It doesn't matter if you have a lot of trees as long as you have more of the other stuff.
As long as you surround them in trash.
I'm sorry, what were you saying, Alex?
Yeah, go ahead.
I had a similar issue with just too many trees on my island, and I didn't want to cut them down.
No.
And I feel like I just kept adding to it, and I didn't want to subtract from it.
I was like,
same with flowers. I just planted flowers everywhere, and they just took over the island.
Because why wouldn't you?
And yeah,
who doesn't like trees?
It looks
and flowers?
great.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm playing this pretty nature game. I'm on an island. I'm gonna put a bunch of trees and flowers everywhere. I got all this fruit. I want more fruit trees.
It is funny because I did roughly the same. I did sort of the same thing, but I think around the time I was trying to get to 4 stars, I was really, and I had unlocked the paths then. I was really trying to expand, and at one point I was just like, okay, I was like, my island had like one kind of central landmass that was surrounded by rivers, and I just cut like all the trees down, and I was like, if I need them, I will replant them later, but I'm just tired of getting like these things getting in the way of like me building stuff or like getting a higher rating or whatever, so I just like clear cut like the entire center part of my island.
Yeah, I feel like this game, you kind of set your own goals.
Yeah.
You decide what is the next thing you want to do. The game passively or mildly does the kind of daily tasks with the Nook Miles, and these are some things to kind of get you started. But really, you kind of want to set your own overarching goals.
Yeah.
Like, I want to build like an awesome restaurant right here in this corner, or I want to decorate, my town with street lamps and paths and nice bushes all around. So yeah, I feel like that's been a staple of the Animal Crossing games, is that it kind of leaves it open ended, and you decide what you want to do. For me, I've been trying to track down every single piece of furniture, wallpaper, flooring, trying to complete my catalog. Um, and unfortunately, the game doesn't track it for you, like in a really easy manner. So I'm just kind of jotting down in a notes app on my phone, like what wallpaper I already have, and crossing it off, which is kind of painstaking.
Yep.
But other times, I'll see some amazing ideas from other islanders on Instagram, on Reddit, and I'm just like, oh, I want to build that into my town. So at one point, I decided there was this thing called it was a instance where you could put a lighthouse and the solar wind turbine generator, and you could put that off in the distance, and it almost looks like you're like on a cliff overlooking it, like off in the distance because of its size.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to put that in my town. That looks really cool.
Yeah, there's some really amazing stuff people have done with perspective in this game.
Yeah.
It's great.
The force perspective.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when they combine that with the custom tiles you can put down, so it's like people have made entire cityscapes with like the custom tiling and combine that with the perspective you get. So it's like, they'll draw like sides of buildings. You put it on the ground, I think, but then like with the way the force, or maybe on cliff sides, I don't know if you can do that, but like I don't know exactly how they do it, but like they combine that perspective with the custom tiles and like have all of these great like visual trickery, like these backgrounds and other things that are kind of wild.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. You're talking about like you kind of make your own goals, and I was sharing my island with others and people who had never played Animal Crossing before, and someone asked at one point, they were like, "So what do I do?" And it's like
whatever you want.
Whatever you want. If you want a sofa, you get a sofa. Like, it's and it really is that like you kind of set your own goals and what you want to build out of it. And I think the island, like being able to decorate, because like both the previous two Animal Crossing games I played, it was like, well, I guess I'll get a bigger house. Like that was kind of like the one main goal you could really do. And obviously you can decorate your house in all sorts of ways, but like now after being able to decorate your island, like looking back into the previous games, like it was kind of limited in the goals you could set for yourself. Because
you could still catch all the fish and bugs and collect everything and that kind of stuff. But in terms of just creative expression through decorating and organizing, it was your house instead of an entire island.
Yeah, because like when I think about like the time I've put into New Horizons, like a good chunk of it is island work. Like the time decorating my house is comparatively small to the time spent on the island. So like that's definitely, I think, an aspect that's pretty major in terms of like affecting how I played and my enjoyment of it. I think on the other hand, and I kind of want to transition to maybe some more nitpicky things here, is like on the other hand, I don't think I enjoyed in the long run that tools broke. I think that in terms of protracting like the process became more of an annoyance than anything. Like specifically the tools, I think crafting as a whole, I don't mind and maybe even like in some ways, like being able to craft pieces of furniture and like getting recipes and that kind of stuff. But like specifically tools like the shovel and the axe and the bug net and the fishing rod, like I kind of just wanted those things to never break. That just became a nuisance because it's not like it's hard to pick up 5 sticks and make a new one. Like it just takes time. And that kind of leads into what I think, as the longer I played the game, the more I got annoyed with certain things kind of in that realm. And like, especially, UI type of things of like clicking through menus and there's been like on Reddit and other places a lot of common complaints of like, oh, if you're in your house on a crafting bench, like just being able to access your entire inventory to craft something instead of having to juggle stuff around, or
being able to craft multiples of things.
yeah, being able to craft multiples of things, or even just speeding through repeated dialogue. Like I kind of dreaded turning in fossils and stuff at some point because just the process of loading into the thing and listening to blathers say the same thing every time, like almost felt like it took longer than it was worth sometimes. But I guess like were there any of those kind of UI type things that like really stuck out to you all for better or worse? Like where did like am I like, or were you mostly okay with it and I'm just like grumpy old man over here? Or
No, totally. The crafting issue that you mentioned, I was playing yesterday just to kind of refresh myself since I've stopped playing for a couple of weeks. And it really hammered home the fact that when your tool breaks and you see like a rare fish, like a shark in the water, you got to either run around, grab enough of those items, and hope that you can find a workbench where you don't have to go inside of a house, because that totally resets all the wildlife that's outside on the island. And that's a problem. You don't want to interrupt the gameplay goals that you have in mind. You're in the moment of trying to fish and catch something that breaks, and it just inserts like this new sub quest that you have to do now in order to get back on track to what you wanted to do originally.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wanted to touch on a couple things you said, and then absolutely I have my own nitpicks and complaints about the game. But when somebody asked you about what do you do in an Animal Crossing game, you should have told them, I think the correct response is earn bells.
Gotta get that cash.
Yeah, it is interesting. I did want to just follow up on that comment because I talked my brother into getting Animal Crossing, and he actually didn't like the game, and he bounced off of it, I think, within like 1 or 2 play sessions. So, and he's sort of he doesn't play a lot of sim games, but the ones he does get into, like he goes like deep into. So he's like the kind of guy who's trying to figure out like how to optimize and fully automate his farm in Stardew Valley, or in Minecraft he's trying to build like these complex red brick machines that will automatically harvest cows for him or whatever. But yeah, with Animal Crossing, I guess it's just a type of game. I don't know exactly if it has to do with the gameplay loops or if it's sort of the real world time stuff that got to him. But yeah, he didn't seem to get into it.
With no other information than what you've said, I feel like somebody who really likes to optimize and like maximize efficiency in games, like a lot of those other kinds of games do, would absolutely hate Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing
it resists you on that.
It's the opposite.
I do think that is maybe part of it, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of those comments you had made, Flex. But I do absolutely agree that there are a list of nitpicks and some things that were kind of, so I mean, sometimes feel bad, I think might be a little bit of a strong word, unless we're talking about Bunny Day. Then I don't know if words can express the rage at fishing up like 50% water eggs. I just don't know who made that decision. That totally that killed fishing for me.
Did anyone complete Bunny Day, by the way? Like actually do all of the?
Nope.
I think I actually did.
Yeah,
I got so many eggs by fishing. I just was able.
I finished I got the little bunny doll, the zipper. is his name. Yeah.
Is that what you get if you do all of the Bunny Day recipes? You get a bunny doll?
Yeah, you get a reminder forever. A piece of furniture that a little blow up zipper that haunts you.
Well, so I crafted as many of those as I could, and then I sold them all because it was one of the best ways to make money off of the eggs. All the eggs I had stockpiled.
I feel like everyone participated in Bunny Day because it was so soon after the game came out, and like there's never
was
going to
so
be that
bad.
communal Animal Crossing experience ever again. It's like Bunny Day was their one chance, and that was it.
And they ruined it. It was bad.
But I mean, obviously, I guess that's sort of a prime example. But yeah, I do agree that the game has its own pace, but some of the UI stuff, especially in a game that you do tasks so many times, like I mentioned fishing, for example, and that was something in games like a sort of kind of a laid back task where you have a little bit of interaction, maybe a little timing. Like sometimes I enjoy it. Like I don't know why, but it's kind of a cool thematic thing, I guess. And in Animal Crossing, I did find that when you're trying to be efficient about earning bells or like, that some of that stuff, like it just is stuff like that really isn't like the optimum way to play, and part of it's because of like the slowness, like things like crafting bait, fishing up eggs, tools breaking. Like sometimes there are more efficient ways of like doing things. Even like picking up fruit was kind of, I got to where I built a nice orchard and then I hated to harvest it just because like the act of picking up fruit. And that's, I think, where a game like I think these types of games always sort of struggle with what the end game is to a certain extent, but I think that's where a game like a Stardew Valley has an advantage because it gives you better tools and like faster ways to harvest things. So as you progress, you can kind of set this goal of like, hey, I'm going to invest in building like a metal sprinkler or building like an automatic harvester or whatever, and it takes out some of that tedium as sort of like a part of the gameplay loop.
Yes.
And Animal Crossing certainly doesn't have to do that as a different type of game, but I do think, and you said it specifically, Flex, like just having to click through all the text and not being able to stack up like crafting bait, like you want to use a ton of bait and you've already done all the work like harvesting the shells. That's a pain in and of itself, and then you can't even craft a stack of like 9 at a time. You have to craft them one by one and watch your little dude like hold up the bait, and like even if you're kind of like doing the little speed up trick where you double tap or whatever, it's still just it's like, why is this so slow?
Yeah, there's a real difference between Animal Crossing and the Stardew Valleys and things more along those lines, where in other games there's a much longer progression to it with a lot more ability upgrades and a lot more things you earn over time. Where Animal Crossing, I think, like this is the first Animal Crossing that's really had any of that to any real extent. So Animal Crossing is really more about like, well, just play this game a little bit each day for as long as you want, and you'll do little things here and there, but it's not about. It's definitely a game that resists the idea of like, oh, I'm going to be super efficient and I'm going to get all the upgrades and beat the game in a way that a lot of those other games do. Like if this was developed by an indie studio, I could see the version of this where you get the golden shovel that never breaks and the golden axe that never breaks, right? And you get the super extra deluxe crafting table that lets you craft multiples of things later on, right? Like those things could all be in here, and Nintendo specifically resists that, I think, with Animal Crossing.
They almost even go a step past resisting it. This game actually does have golden tools, but those golden tools still break.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So it's like they kind of like tease it and then still don't give you what you want.
Right.
But yeah, it's a.
They
Go ahead, Alex.
sorry. Yeah, and it's weird because, as you mentioned, Nate, that they take these steps where they actually resist giving you these shortcuts. But then I got to a certain point where it unlocked the ability for me to shop the catalog without actually needing to go into um, the town hall
Yeah.
building. So I was like, oh, this is a nice shortcut. I no longer need to actually physically go back to the ABD and then check which items I have purchased and which ones I haven't, because that's the main way that I can access my catalog. And I could just bring it up on the Nook phone. It'd also be great if I can sell my items or buy, like whatever I wanted to do from wherever I was. But I don't think they have that.
Yeah, and then they put the box on the front of the shop where you can sell items, but you get less money for it if you don't if you
Yeah.
take the
I
more
feel-
efficient route.
I feel like they give you half measures a lot. They like
Yeah.
they like kind of meet you halfway in some ways, but there's always a gotcha. Like there's always this isn't what you really wanted to it, which is part. It's such a weird. It's kind of like it's like this true Nintendo like. People like us like to joke about Nintendo of like, oh, you love them but you hate them at the same time, and like Animal Crossing, I feel like does that a lot of like it comes up with a lot of really good ideas, and then there's a lot of stuff in there that you're just like, why would you do it that way? And I think with Animal Crossing in particular, I think something like I'll be honest, and like I spent probably over 100 hours playing New Horizons, and I'm not even sure if I enjoyed that time or not. It's like I definitely didn't hate it, but I'm not sure that I really liked it either. I kind of came away from it like somewhat indifferent, and I had this battle the whole time of like internal battle of like enjoying. It's like there's this competing thing of there's this leisurely kind of like take the experience as it is and like, oh, this is simple island life kind of, there's no real pressure, there's no stakes on anything. It's like, just decorate your island as you see fit, like take your time, like there's no rush, like just be very chill about everything, all this expression you can do. And then there's on the other end, there's like this really slow progression. There's like the constantly rebuilding tools, like the UI issues. And there's like those parts where we've talked about the game kind of resists you doing certain things. And it was like kind of that balance of like the carefree, expressive island life versus the game resisting. And I kind of felt that tension between like within myself a lot of like, I'm not really sure what this game, like, does it want me to play my way or does it want me to play its way? Or does it, where's the game wanting me to go here? And I think the game's answer in itself is somewhere in the middle. It's like, if you want to do the things that we thought would be fun and kind of like designed around to be rewarding, then like that's fully supported. But it's like, if you want to like kind of find some efficiencies somewhere, or like if you came up with a goal that's like kind of tangent to kind of like the main goals, like it's going to fight you a little bit.
I would probably say that the goals of the game from the designer's perspective are to encourage that sort of easygoing play that you're talking about. Like, don't worry too much about it. Do what you feel like doing in the moment. Stop for the day when you feel like you don't have anything else you're going to do today. Come back to it later. Like, the whole game is designed, I think, to encourage that mentality. And I think pretty much everything in the game, you could look at it and say, okay, this is how it's trying to push players towards that mentality, right? So I don't think the design goal is actually that muddied for Animal Crossing. I think it's pretty clear that that's where they're trying to get players, but I think that is so antithetical to so many games
Right.
that that's where the tension comes from. Like this game in a vacuum, for people who don't play games, they probably have a much less hard time getting over some of those humps, is my guess.
So
And I actually, so there are a couple things there. I mean, there are some things that it's hard to say what's a better design, but I don't think, like in some cases, like I think some of the implementation is kind of bad design.
Yeah, and I'm not even speaking to the quality of the design. I'm just saying the intention of the design, I feel like, is very clear.
Maybe the overall, but I mean, some of the stuff that we're picking on, like there's,
Yeah.
I don't know if that excuses like bad or slow UI.
No, I'm not excusing it at all. I'm just saying I think that's what they're going for.
Right.
But I guess the other thing that I kind of wonder about, that in some ways I see what you're saying, but at the same time, if you look at, for example, the house upgrades, which is kind of one of the central goals of the game. Like if there is a goal to Animal Crossing, it would probably be getting your house fully upgraded, and maybe hitting a 5-star island.
Yeah,
Those
I think that's
kind of
fair.
be the two concrete goals. And if you look at how much it costs to upgrade a house, like, I mean, I don't know if this is kind of the argument of they want you to play 1,000,000 years because you get a few extra bells a day. But even at that pace, like, and then there's the stock market, right? Which we haven't touched on. That's kind of an interesting piece of discussion, but it's like some of the, like at least one of the goals, and I guess getting a 5-star island also probably requires a substantial amount of cash. Some of the goals really do require you to grind, farm, like I don't know what the right word is. So there's definitely some built-in incentive in this game to to play like a classic, and that's cool. I mean, that's kind of a hook, right, for like classic sort of sim games. It's just that I kind of get, and in some cases, like maybe the fact that you have to run to the ABD encourages you to bump into your villagers and talk to them every day. Like I can kind of get those pieces of design, but things like having to click through crafting 1,000,000 times, or not being able to craft multiple things, or like the way that the game slows you down, like I do question, I can definitely understand how Flex feels. And I mean, I did enjoy my time with the game. Like I probably didn't spend quite as much time, and I probably started to kind of peel out a little sooner, but I can definitely see, like, I found that the longer I engaged with the game, like the more those things grated on me. They've got things like the stock market, which that's kind of an interesting and odd piece of design. But even that, like just having to buy turnips and drop them all over your floors, and then find the right day and check with your friends and like connect to an island, like the whole multiplayer experience, like it's very odd. Like, I mean, Animal Crossing does some things really well, and I think it's my nature, and I think it's some of us to kind of pick on things like this, but some of this stuff is kind of baffling. It's like, why is there the stock market, and like why is some of the gameplay like so slow? And then and maybe it would make more sense if your final house upgrade didn't cost 2,000,000 bells or whatever, like plus whatever else you want to do with your island. I am glad that they made the terrain manipulation free, like once you unlock it. If that had costed money, if that had cost even a nominal amount of bells, I probably would have just been like, I'm not touching this, because I've reached a point where I just don't want to grind bells for the rest of my days.
Yeah, I do actually really want to talk about the stock market, because I think it's like I almost feel like the stock market completely backfired on the developers in this game, because it's been in previous games, but this is the most like online internet connected version of Animal Crossing to date. And like all four of us engaged in the stock market with each other, and I think more broadly, like with just random people on the internet too. And like, there was probably a solid month or two where my version of playing Animal Crossing was checking the stock market. And like, that's basically how I engaged with the game. And it makes it very easy to get cash very quickly. And even doing that, it still took me a while to get the bells needed to really do what I wanted to do. And there's like trying to think through what this game would look like without the stock market, and like the economy that Ryan was hitting at of how long it would take to upgrade your house, how long it would take to buy furniture. And then you think of like, yes, terraforming is free, but placing bridges is not free. Placing inclines is not free. If you do decide you want to move any houses around because you put them in not ideal places early on, that is not free. Those things are all very, very expensive actions. And I funded it all with the stock market because that's very easy to abuse. And I feel like it's easy to abuse in a way they didn't really anticipate. But it's like, what can you guys imagine playing this game without the stock market? Like,
Yeah, it would be a different game. The stock market is a fun idea that was so completely not balanced for the online world that this game is in.
It's
Yeah, you
bizarre.
can see
I mean, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that the way that they implemented the online, you can see that they did not intend for 10 people to join a person's island at once. The way that you constantly see those loading screens and someone's visiting, and then when they leave, you see the same thing.
Yeah.
It just completely stops everything dead in its tracks.
And that someone can't leave if you're looking, this is more of that UI stuff, like if someone's in a menu or looking at their phone, someone else can't leave your island. Like, that's the most wild thing.
The online
that's a
stuff
fair
is crazy.
point. I was gonna wonder, like, yeah, if they had, what they were thinking with the stock market, if they did intend that as some sort of like social shortcut. But yeah, what you're saying makes me think that no, really, they just kind of like, it's like a legacy feature of Animal Crossing that just happened to like kind of break the game with the internet world. And I mean, hey, like, in some ways, it's not a. I mean, I don't particularly like the stock market and the randomness necessarily, but it's kind of neat that if you have like a pool of friends or a community or whatever that you can connect with, like, you can use that to help accelerate your gameplay. I mean, that in and of itself is sort of an experience. It's just, yeah, sometimes I think maybe Animal Crossing created, different experiences and economies than it intended.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Like Flex was saying, things are so expensive. I mean, imagine all that creativity that we talked about at the beginning, like as one of the highlights of Animal Crossing. Imagine, like, could people do any of that stuff without something like the stock market to fund it? And that's one thing that kind of wonder, like, I can see some reasons why you'd want to slow the player down a bit, but at the same time, if you just give players the sandbox, like, or give them a way to earn the sandbox, like, I think it leads to more resources to do these creative things with. And there's one other thing
because I
wanted
think
to touch on, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I think one thing Nate was trying to express earlier was the game, and this is how Animal Crossing has always been, like back to the original GameCube game, is it's always been a game that's best at its, I think it's intended to be played in like 30 to 60 minutes a day. Like, probably play it around a half an hour a day, but you play it every day for years. Like, it's, I think it's kind of meant to be a game that you just check in on, maybe not every single day, but, close to every day. And you don't really get a lot done on any given day. And a lot of that day is kind of doing the same thing. It's like, oh, collect your money tree, hit your money rocks, pick up your message in a bottle, like, just, check what's in the store. Like, you just kind of do your your handful of dailies, so to speak. And I guess maybe this is where like my personal preference come in, is like I'm just not going to stick with that game for years that it would take to build out the island in the way like we were just talking about the economics of it, like to build out, like fully upgrade my house and put in all the bridges and slopes I wanted and like all that stuff, just how much money that takes. Like I'm realistically not the person who's going to stick with it long enough to do that without the stock market. But I think that's probably what they're going for. I just think in today's world, that's maybe a little unrealistic. And they kind of, if it weren't for the stock market, they kind of like really don't give you a way to speed that up any.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say that in the 3DS version, I was able to pay off my house and upgrade everything purely by catching sharks. They had that island that you could go off on. It was kind of based off of the GameCube, GBA connectivity function, but they just threw in that island that you could visit. You caught more exotic fish there, and I brought it back, sold them for more bells. In this game, a lot of people started out figuring that you could catch tarantulas, at least in the northern hemisphere, and selling those as a quick way to earn cash, building their own tarantula islands. My daughter, later, she figured out that if you had the patience, and I think that's a key word with this game, is you need a lot of patience. If you stored your fish or your bugs in your house storage, and you waited for a certain NPC character to show up on your island and sold your bugs or fish to that character, either CJ or Flick, then you would make, I think, double the amount, or I don't remember the exact
extra. It was a good chunk extra.
It was a good chunk extra, and so there were people are going to find other ways. It might not be as ridiculous as the stock market returns, especially since I never touched that stuff in the previous games. Like I always ended up losing whenever I tried to buy any turnips from Joan. So I feel like with the interconnected nature of the Switch and Nintendo Online and apps and websites making it more easy for people to connect together and sell their turnips, that really accelerated that workaround for earning bells.
Yeah, for sure. I think that for me personally, the stock market in this game is completely busted from a balance perspective, but like the fact that it was completely busted was an enjoyable experience for me.
Yeah.
And so like I have this thing of like, oh, it's the game intentionally, I think, as designed, was meant for you to, like, if you want to risk some money, you can put it in the stock market. You'll probably get some return sometime, but not every time, and sometime you'll lose money, and it's going to take a while to pay off your house. People might find, like, what are the most expensive bugs on fish, and they might focus on those. But it'll take a while to pay off your house and get all the things you want to do and build all your bridges and ramps and stuff. And I think the designers really probably intended for those processes to take a long time with the kinds of numbers that are in this game. And that is, I think, in line with the sort of general design vision of Animal Crossing. But I think there are people like us and like most of the people that played this game that do look for those sorts of exploits and look for those ways to maximize efficiency. And so it's this funny thing of like, they did such a bad job of balancing parts of the game that it ended up making it somewhat more fun in a hilarious way for at least a short time.
Yeah.
I think that explains why some people do the time traveling aspect of it. They find that that's a workaround against that nature of the game of making you wait until the next day. Right. Drawing out that process. They just change the system clock and then they move on and continue on with their goals.
Yeah, and that's always been one of the defining feature of Animal Crossing ever since the original one was like following the system clock. And I've always enjoyed that aspect of it. Like I think that's a charming thing of like because then it allows them to have birthdays and holidays and those kind of things that play on and seasons that play on real world stuff. Um, but I guess I almost feel like if it's gonna take a long time, like if they're gonna make it that slow lackadaisical, like and maybe this is a transition we can make here is like I kind of wish there was something more interesting to engage with on a daily basis on the island as opposed to kind of and maybe I'm just not the person, maybe other people do get enjoyment out of I'm going to catch a couple fish and I'm going to hit my money rock and I'm going to check out the store and that's all I'm going to do today. And even though I've done that a million other times, I'm still getting enjoyment out of it. So maybe that's a thing of like, oh, it's just not, doesn't appeal to me. But I guess for me, if it's going to take a long time, I wanted there to be something more interesting to do on a daily basis. And I think what carried me through for a while, in addition to just discovering the new stuff and like going through the progression that Nate talked about at the beginning, is another one of the kind of defining features of Animal Crossing. Maybe we can transition a little bit to like its character and such, because I do think this game has a lot of really charming characters. I mean, obviously, Nook and Isabelle are kind of the series staples that are as endearing or criminal as they always have been, however you want to classify them. But then there's also, of course, all the other villagers and stuff. And like, I guess I'd be curious to like hear from you all, like for the character, like the villagers you had, the neighbors you had, or even just talking about the common characters like Nook and Isabelle, or Timmy and Tommy and Blathers and everyone else. Like, did you kind of have any standout moments for good or bad, or like did like that the I guess that side of Animal Crossing, like the playful, endearing character side of it, like was that as good as it's ever been for Nate and Alex, or Ryan as your first Animal Crossing? Like, was that a big draw for you?
So Flex, why don't you tell us about Filbert?
Oh, Filbert's great. He likes food so much. You give that boy an apple, he'll be your best friend forever.
Yeah,
he's so precious.
Yeah, no, I really wanted to talk about this as well because I think I may have alluded to it earlier, as that's one of the things that I thought was kind of charming about Animal Crossing. You're going out to catch your fish or whatever, and a lot of times you're bumping into your villagers and seeing what they're up to, or like what's new. And I kind of like the little personality archetypes that they have. So I even did like a little sort of mini blog on some of my villagers. I had I'll try not to go too into detail, but I think I had Tank, who was like a rhino, who was like Mr. Fitness. And I had Flo, who was like a penguin, who was like this kind of, I don't know, tough talking is probably not the right word, but she kind of was blunt about things in like a funny way. Yeah, I think my third villager was like Bangle, who was like this tiger who wanted to be like a pop star. And it's kind of funny how things play out. Like I remember it may have been my fifth villager. So then, yeah, I had Gladys, who was like an ostrich, who was like a very like nice kind of even-tempered person. But then like my fifth villager actually, and this was one thing that was funny about Animal Crossing, is because I guess it's kind of hard to control, I guess maybe if you don't have amiibos or whatever, like who joins your village. So like you plan a house, and unless you happen to meet somebody at your campsite that you like somebody random will move in. And so I remember like with my fifth villager, Ozzy, moved in, and I think he's actually, his personality type is probably similar to Filbert in some ways, but he's a bit weird. And his first impression was just really odd. I was kind of unhappy that he moved in, like, because he like talks about like the bugs in his bed and stuff like that. He just says these really off the wall things. But then like you talk to him a bit more, and he's like, he like nicknamed me his snack bud. He like loves food, and he like is very philosophical about food. It's kind of funny, like the way like some of the villagers sort of, they develop these little stories and personalities. Like I remember I got stung by wasps one time. Like, it's really annoying. I guess I didn't have my net out when I was chopping or shaking a tree. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll fix this later. And I ran over and talked to Ozzy, and, just to do the daily conversation. And he's like, oh man, he's like, that looks really painful. He's like, here, have this medicine. And I was like, you're awesome, Ozzy. Like, I thought you were really this like weird, creepy koala person, but actually you're like kind of a nice guy. So yeah, there's just some really funny stories. Like, I remember one time, I was walking through the town square, and like, Tank and Ozzy walked by, and like Ozzy's like steaming over something, and I walk up to him, and he's like, man, Tank is the worst. He's like a stale potato chip. And I was like, whoa, what just happened here? And they were like, apparently they were talking about dreams, and like Tank is kind of like not a very sensitive guy, so he just went off on a tangent or something, and it made Ozzy mad. It's obviously, it's all kind of, I'm sure it's scripted in some way, but it was just really funny, like to kind of stumble by, like you're living on this deserted island with like this colorful cast of like these animal characters, and like sometimes just these goofy things happen, or like the personalities can be pretty charming. I mentioned, I think, Bengal was like this tiger who wanted to be a pop star on my island. So every time I talked to her, she would say things like, "Hey, how's my bestie?" Or like, "Do you want to practice being pop stars together?" Or like, I'm working on my pose. And like, it's just always kind of like charming and like endearing. Like, "Oh, that's cool, Bengal. What's up?" Like, and she's like, "Yeah." She's like, like, "I'm practicing posing today." And I'm like, sounds about right.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of those interactions are really charming, and I like that the villagers will interact with each other too. And like, because I had two villagers who kind of clashed and like got angry at each other as well. They seem to make it up though later. But yeah, they all kind of have their quirks. Like Filbert, Ryan mentioned Filbert, and I don't know how old he actually is, but like he acts like the equivalent of like, I don't know, a 10-year-old, human boy personality of like just very, very sincere and earnest, but also not the brightest, not the brightest little boy either. So like, would just kind of have that like, oh, how does this work? And like ask some like really, like say some things just like, oh, he clearly just doesn't understand the world, but that's fine. He's like a little boy, and it's cute. But what about you, Nate and Alex? Do you have some kind of favorite villagers or anecdotes, or do you hate all your villagers?
Yeah, I had a funny conversation between two of my villagers. There's Marina, who's this really sweet. She's an octopus, and she's always very nice. And she's having a conversation trying to help out Rocket, who's dressed up like this Power Ranger gorilla. She's a gorilla and in a pink suit. Like a superhero suit.
Your villagers sound way more interesting than mine.
Yeah, I was like an octopus. Like
it was one of my starters, and I was just like, yes, I love all the ones that are wear some sort of superhero outfit. And Marina was giving advice to Rocket about, how to maintain her energy by going to bed early at night, earlier in the evening. And Rocket's just laughing, and it's like, wait, you're serious? So Marina's like, no, you gotta get your rest. That's how you can wake up earlier, and then you have a great start to the day. And then they turn to me and it's like, what do you think, Alex? And I just say, you should just stay up all night. And then Rocket totally loved that idea. She's like, yeah, stay up all night? I could totally do that. Then I'll get up even earlier. So yeah, there were so many great interactions between all the characters. The emotions that they emit between your own villager and all the other characters is great. I love collecting all the different reactions over time and sharing that when you're visiting other players and just interacting with others. It adds a new dimension. The way that the Nooklings, Timmy and Tommy, start to fall asleep when you're visiting their shop late at night, just before closing time. They start to yawn, and you see the little bubbles popping out of their nose or mouth. It's hilarious. Just the little touches like that. It really adds a lot of charm to the characters.
Yeah. They also, I think, this game looks way better than the previous Animal Crossings, and I think that brought the characters to, at least for me, brought the characters to life more. I think it felt to me at least like they were a lot more expressive than I remember from the previous games. I don't know if y'all felt that way as well, but
yeah, the fact that this is the first HD Animal Crossing really made a huge impact. I remember waiting for this game on the Wii U, and by that time that they figured out that the Wii U was not going, Nintendo knew that it wasn't gonna survive very long. They probably just immediately moved that project over to the Switch, but they did tease a HD Animal Crossing with some sort of Plaza app that they had for download on the Wii U just to interact with different villagers. And that was my first glimpse at what an HD Animal Crossing could be. Sadly, it was just a tease. So to finally see this game realized in full HD really, made a world of difference from the jump to from the 3DS.
Yeah, I think this game looks really nice, and it would create some oddly really nice moments of just I don't know, it's evening and you see the moon in the sky and you sit down on a bench looking out over the water and kind of adjust the camera angle and the water looks really nice and you get the reflection of the moon and it's a surprisingly nice looking game despite being a very simple it's not a really, there's not there's not a ton of detail necessarily, and it's not like what you traditionally think of as a really high fidelity game visually, but it looks really nice still, kind of in the way that Nintendo often has that really nice clean look. It worked really well here. So kind of one last thing I had on my list to talk about before we wrap up, but does anyone else have any topic they want to bring up before we kind of move towards the end of this discussion?
Were there different events that happened? I know, Flex, your birthday happened during the month after the game came out. Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, this podcast is recorded exactly 4 months after the game's release. 5 months. It released on March 20th.
Yep. So 4 months. It is July 20th.
Oh wow.
And what was your experience like? Did you play on that day during your birthday?
Yep, I played on my birthday. It was actually more involved than I expected it to be. you you would get like someone hosted a birthday party. For me, it was a jock pig named Curly. He was like one of my initial three. I think they determine it like who, because I think there's like some kind of secret friendship rating that's under the hood, and it's probably like who you're quote unquote best friends with, which I guess was Curly. But yeah, they like that he like when I started playing that day and like walked out of my house, he like popped out in front and was like, "Oh hey, it's your birthday today. Like come by my house, we'll throw a party." And like you go to his house and there was like one or two other random villagers there, and there was a cake. You got to blow out the cake, and you got to hit a piñata as well. And he gave me some kind of gift, like ended up being like a birthday themed wallpaper or like a birthday hat or something.
Oh, that's funny. I think I got these like really goofy glasses.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it might have been that actually. But then they give you the part that was, so I thought that would be it, but the part that's more involved, and Ryan also had his birthday in this period, is they give you 10 cupcakes. And if you go around to each of your 10 villagers, if you give them a cupcake, they will give you another birthday themed gift. And so like you get to kind of have a birthday chat with every villager and then get another gift. So that was those little things are, I think, I kind of mentioned before that like the way Animal Crossing does follow, this has always been one of the charms of Animal Crossing, the way it follows the calendar, is it does allow them to do events like that. They get to play off holidays and birthdays and seasons and everything. And that stuff's, it's generally pretty mild, but it's also a really, it can also be like a fun, endearing little thing of like, oh, it knows when my birthday is. And like, it actually had, I could spend 15 minutes like doing this party and walking around and passing out cupcakes, and except I didn't give one to Becky because she doesn't deserve it.
Screw Becky.
I kept that 10th one for myself.
Yeah, I had Becky on my island too. She was no good.
No. Becky, another villager on my island, Muffy, and Becky was telling Muffy that she did not dress appropriately and needed to change her ways. And I'm like, it's just not going to fly, Becky. I'm not going to have that kind of like looking down on others. Like Muffy's her own person and can dress how she wants to. Like you can back off, Becky.
Becky is not chill at all.
Did you have a conversation with Isabella about Becky?
On two occasions I tried to tell Isabella that Becky was a problem, but Isabel wouldn't do anything about it. I stopped talking to Becky, hoping that she would just like get depressed and leave because I'm not talking to her. But she's just Becky's not going anywhere.
I mean, I didn't have the Pietro experience, but I've heard what you're describing. Maybe not quite as creepy or dangerous, but what you're describing sounds a little bit like the Pietro experience.
It's way worse.
I mean, Pietro sounds entertaining at least. Becky's just a stuck-up old bird.
Yeah. If you go into her house, it's like all this really expensive furniture and wallpaper and like classical music playing. I'm just like, get out of here, Becky.
Yeah, it's just like really dry. It's like classically fancy, but also like really dry and prickly feeling. Like she's like, don't touch anything. You might get finger. You might get dirt on it, or she's like that kind of personality of like everything needs to be proper, and no fun can be. This is a no fun zone when Becky's around.
Mm-hmm. She did end up leaving my island. It was a good day.
Whereas Muffy was a young a young goth lady who did not dress in ways that Becky found appropriate. So
that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much charm with this game. The fact that when I started paving the roads, and then the villagers, the characters on my island would just start walking on those paths. It was just like a really subtle thing that it's like, oh wow, that's great. They recognize the environment that I'm setting up, and then they're interacting with it. Or when they just start singing in the middle of the town square in the center. when you go over to someone's island and you see their little character waving up at you from while you're still in your plane.
Yeah.
I love those little touches.
Yeah, or if like you catch a bug in their vision range and they'll like clap or something like.
I have one villager, Rex. He was trying to he had his net out trying to catch a butterfly, and then I went in and I caught it in front of him, and then he had that shock reaction.
Yeah.
I never did that, but I always wondered.
First.
Yes,
there were definitely some moments where I was like, man, I wonder if it would be like a jerk move to like to kind of like grab this insect in front of this person.
Yeah, that's really funny.
I was trying my best to get Rex to leave. He's this lion that's always, it looks like he's half asleep, and my kids adore him. They would not let me let him go. So I was kind of stuck with this dude that he just kind of he's characterized as a lazy lion. He just kind of mills about and looks like he's stoned all the time.
Sounds perfect. Send him over to my island.
Yeah, I'll trade Becky.
My kids will never let him
go. Which I don't know that we have time to really get into it, but I believe Alex and I played with others and kind of shared an island, which is also a very different experience from previous Animal Crossings, at least for me. Which I actually think for me that kind of enhanced my enjoyment, because then like decorating the island became like a shared project in a way that I think was kind of fun. I could maybe see some people like, I mean, obviously that depends on like how well you get along with the people you're sharing the island with, because alternatively like you could be trying to do something and then someone else could kind of like, undo it or alter it. But for me it was a positive experience, and like things I didn't enjoy doing, like someone else might enjoy doing, like planting flowers or something like that, or laying down paths, and then things I would enjoy doing, like they might not enjoy doing. So like you can kind of like have different people doing different island projects and really build out the island. Did you have any experiences around that, Alex? Like how did that work for you?
There's the occasional rock breaking incident that will happen from time to time, where they'll eat a fruit and then accidentally hit the rock with a shovel. But other than that, I think it is. I agree. It's enjoyable because you have items to trade with others. I have tons of extra recipes, or I have some extra bells, and I'll just drop it in front of my daughter's houses. My wife ended up picking up the game and Switch Lite, and then we would visit each other's islands using the local multiplayer option, and that really helped as well. I think it added a lot more. It added another dimension where you could, go around, and my kids were playing hide and seek on the island. So, you kind of make up, your own fun. It would have been nice if there was more built in, like games that you could play together. Otherwise it's just kind of that, or I attended a friend's, baby shower on their island, and they had a treasure hunt where you had to go around the island, dig up a specific thing that he had hidden, but he also buried some other items like bells and furniture and other things. But then when you found the right thing, you'll know it. And he ended up burying this pink egg that represented the gender reveal of the baby. So that was fun.
That's very funny.
Yeah, you kind of have to just be creative. You have to do what you have to just make your own fun with the tools that they give you.
Yeah, and I think that's probably kind of emblematic of this game as a whole. Is like, it's not going to give you many like pre-designed games that you can play together in multiplayer, but you can like that baby reveal is pretty clever, and like you can kind of come up with your own stuff. I have heard it's frustrating for people who are. I assume you were the like lead, or what do they call it? The villager representative or island representative or whatever, like the lead person. So maybe we would have had a
Yeah.
different experience if we were like the secondary player.
Yeah, I have a friend. She had her son create the first account, and basically at night she would just play his account in order to make any progress
Yeah.
in the game.
Yep.
So I would see, her son's name log on at like 11 at night. And I'm like, oh, okay, that must be her. Like, there's no way he's
Yeah.
still up.
Yeah. But for me
So,
as the
yeah,
island
luckily-
lead, it was enjoyable.
Yeah. Luckily that wasn't the case. But yeah, I can definitely see the frustration with, trying to make progress when you're not that primary player.
Yeah.
And we would also try out that the local, like on the same console, having like a second and a third player. Have you ever tried that?
Yeah, I did that a little
where,
bit.
you would have everyone on the screen at once.
Yeah, that's also. I tried some of that when the game first came out, and then once we realized how limiting it was, it's like, there's really no point
Yeah.
in doing this. Like, really, one of the players, like, really only, like, if you have two people on screen at once, like, really only whoever the lead player is can actually do things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we kind of dropped that pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah, it was a nice distraction for my kids. All three of them were on screen at once and just they were having fun somehow. It was just a great way for me to keep them occupied for the next hour.
Yeah.
So they were busy for the next hour. Yeah, I think other things like the being able to draw and write messages on other people's bulletin boards, that was fun.
Mm-hmm.
We never did that within our household, but I would leave thank you messages on people's bulletin boards whenever I visited them. Friends of mine, they would let me go over their island, sell my turnips. I would go into handheld mode and draw a picture of Daisy May for them, or a Pikachu or something.
Yeah, I did enjoy being able to, like send letters to people or write posts. And I think the game as a whole just has like a lot of little touches like that are kind of add to the charm of it. And it's like they're seemingly little things, like just being able to write on someone else's bulletin board, like by itself is a very minor thing. But I think the game has enough of those minor things that they add up. And like kind of creates that atmosphere that's fun. So I think we're gonna wrap up here in a few minutes, but I kind of want to do one last go around, like if any of you have or get kind of some final thoughts of each of you, like how did, I guess, coming away overall, like were you happy with the game? Like what is kind of, I guess, like your final impressions? And it sounds like most of us, I'm also curious about this while you're giving your final impressions, it sounds like most of us have really tapered off our Animal Crossing play, if not stopped entirely. So I guess I'm kind of curious like where you're at with that, and like are you going to play much more, or are you not sure, or like where are you at with that? But Alex, you want to start? Give some final thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, I stuck around for it for a bit, and I think it was the perfect game at the right time for me. Just current events and everything just felt so depressing that I needed this game to kind of just focus on just relaxing. It's almost like a meditation game for me, where I just go off and do some fishing. It didn't matter, how much time it took. I had a lot of extra time at home all of a sudden. So I think for many others, it probably they felt similar, and which is why it sold so well. And being quarantined and playing this game, being a fan of the series, I think I really liked it. But I also recognize that it has some room for improvement. Playing the mobile game, I felt like it had the very similar trajectory, where when it came out, there were so many weird design choices with the game. And there was a Polygon article that came out when New Horizons was released, and they were talking about how the mobile game was actually more superior now because they built in a bunch of quality of life updates. And I wonder if, in another year or so, we're going to see them slowly patch in a lot of these things, but it's just taking so long. And I can't stick with it for, day in and day out. I feel like it did its job for that period of time where I felt like I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of grateful for that. I still pop in every now and then. I just tried out the new update with the swimming and the diving, and it's a nice addition. It's a small thing, but I really wonder if this is kind of where we're up to that point where Nintendo kind of has to have this more rapid pace of updates, kind of like a mobile game where it just kind of continues to pull you in. And I'm not sure if that's something that they're thinking about, but maybe that's what these holiday events were supposed to be. They had that, obviously the Bunny Day, which didn't work out so well, but they had other things, like there was a wedding event, and you go in and you take wedding photos of this married couple, these characters, Cyrus and Reese, who were from New Leaf. I tried that for a little bit, but I don't feel like there's a lot of depth in it. Like the May Day thing was fun. There was a little maze, hedge maze that they threw in there.
But that lasts all of
that
half
was
an
a
hour or
one-time
something.
thing. Yeah. So I felt like a lot of these things, they would be nice if they had a little bit more depth to them, but I'm not sure if that's what they're trying to do. It's just maybe their intention is these small little pieces, and the point of the game is to really play it in the way that they want you to play it, which is these small chunks. They want you to have patience. Don't try to rush and try to build out your house immediately. To just try to accumulate items over time, a little bit here and there. But I feel like I've kind of moved on from that. So I might still check in here and there. These games always release so far apart from my birthday, so I might check in like next February when I can celebrate my birthday and actually enjoy some of those fun events.
You're such an honest person. You could have just lied about your birthday.
I know, but no, it's I refuse to time travel. I think I messed around with time traveling like a little bit when I wanted to go and visit my cousin's island, and that first day that you play, you're not allowed to even use the airport. But other than that, I kind of just stuck with the game as it's meant to be played. That's how I get my enjoyment out of it. I'm sure, that's not how everybody enjoys it. So not to knock on time traveling, but it's just not the way that I play it.
I wonder if the most common birthday in Animal Crossing is March 21st.
I'm not even sure if you can even get the most out of it, because that first day you can't really do much.
But that won't stop people from doing that.
Yeah, but overall I liked it. I felt like it served its purpose, and I might still pop in every now and then, but I have other games to play now.
Yeah. What about you, Ryan? You got some? What was your kind of takeaways?
Yeah, it was I guess a good first experience for Animal Crossing for me. I played for probably about 2 months, from like late March to late soonish after it released to around mid to late May. And I'm glad I stopped when I did. I think we talked about, like, I felt like I had kind of maybe seen a bit of the fringes or the edges or whatever, like, and I could see how continuing might kind of grind a little bit in some ways. Things we talked about, like harvesting fruit trees and stuff like that, became a bit tedious, I felt like. But overall, it was a good experience. And like you said, the game just has tons of charm. And I guess that's hard to quantify. It's less of a, it's not really a story you progress through, and it's not really even like, a simulation of systems necessarily in a way, but it's sort of this like I guess maybe it's like a social sim. I'm not sure. It's hard to describe, but like we talked about with like the various anecdotes and the little stories, it makes it a pretty charming experience. And I think they've done a good job with a lot of that. It is a bit frustrating, like we talked about, that the core gameplay mechanics, they don't they have those weird quirks and design decisions that I'm not sure exactly what they're intended to accomplish, but the core of the game was fun. Like I enjoyed getting on for an hour or maybe two most days and just doing kind of the daily stuff, maybe doing some of the daily Nook Mile stuff and talking to the villagers. And some days that was good enough. And I think the game kind of encourages you to do that a lot of days. So, and then if you have more time on a weekend, you can go a little bit farther, and that was fun too. So, yeah. No, it was a good experience.
What about Nate? What is your cat who's sitting there with you think about Animal Crossing?
You know, I think he would find it pretty chill. I think he would be all right with it. But mostly he just annoys us all every day, all day.
Well, he is a cat.
Yeah.
But what were kind of your takeaways from Animal Crossing?
I loved it. I think it's a great experience, a great game. I am definitely not, just like I think most of us are, probably not the person who's going to play it every day for years and years, and I knew that going in. So I had my goals that I set as I was playing for those first weeks and months, and when I accomplished all of those goals, I was just like, yeah, you know what, I could keep playing this game every day, and I probably wouldn't get that much out of it, and I'd probably end up feeling frustrated with some of the lack of stuff to do after that point. So I'm just gonna stop, and I stopped playing it, and I have a very positive memory and experience with that game, because I just stopped as soon as I ran out of my like major goals that I was working on.
Yeah.
And I don't really have any. I mean, that's how I play games. I play a game and then I stop and then I move on to other games, and that's what I did with Animal Crossing, and I enjoyed every little bit of it pretty much.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I definitely enjoyed it overall. I mean, I think the longer it went on, some of the things, so maybe I needed to stop sooner, to Nate's point of like getting what I wanted out of it and then kind of moving on. I think what we talked about up top of like the progression, I think kind of gave me goals to work towards for a good chunk of time, and I think that was enjoyable. And the game's just very charming, as we've all said. But then I think once I kind of ran out of more direct goals, the kind of daily grind, so to speak, just kind of doing the same stuff, wore down on me. And to Alex's point, it would be nice if they kind of had more regular reasons and updates to kind of keep coming back. Like in some ways, some of their current updates, like they added in red at some point, and it's like some of those were there from launch in previous games. So it's like they're not even kind of back to base level in some ways of previous games in the series. But they'll probably get there at some point, and I might check it out some more over time. Like I'd kind of like to at least boot it up like in the winter and see what it looks like with snow on the ground. Like that probably looks pretty neat. So like I could see me popping back in here and there, but I think for the most part I'm pretty much done. I think I really kind of hit my wall of like I definitely, to what Alex was saying, like this game came out at a good time. Like anyone listening to this in the future, it came out right as the coronavirus pandemic was
Yep.
starting to get real. So like when I was like that first month or two, like I was kind of playing it regularly every night. Kind of the main slot I had to play it was at like 10 p.m. So like, and the nights in that game are kind of peaceful, and like it was just kind of like a peaceful zen out kind of thing playing every night. And like I appreciate it for that, even if that got old after a couple months. And a lot of I didn't get too deep into it here, but a lot of the UI stuff started to really wear on me as time went on. So I think I've hit my point where I'm probably pretty much done with it. But it's for what it's going for. Like it's a very good. Like I think it's I'm gonna say it's the most fun I've had with an Animal Crossing game to date, and I'm happy I had my time with it, even if I can nitpick it in a lot of ways. And with that, I think we're gonna call this an episode. We've gone for an hour and a half, or maybe a little more, about talking about Animal Crossing New Horizons. And we'll be back at some point to talk about other games. But this has been a good chat. Thank y'all for joining me. Thanks anyone for listening. And we're gonna sign off. Close out this episode of ATACS, and we will see you next time.